Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Testing in Bahrain is over and everybody wants to know what is the definitive ranking of all the 10 cars we have on the grid for the upcoming season. Everyone though is getting aboard the Aston Martin hype train. Even Mercedes say that Aston Martin might well be the second best car at the moment, and Alonso could be in for a podium on his very first weekend in the car. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Let's talk Aston Martin, not the car yet though, but the driver pairing. We know that Stroll has had this injury. Unclear exactly what this injury is. Aston Martin won't really say, but there's rumours that he's either broken one, if not both wrists, and surely that's going to be a few weeks out of the sport. So they're considering the replacement that they might have to bring in for Bahrain, which wouldn't be a surprise to be honest. And there's been a lot of talk, and you can understand why, about the potential return of Sebastian Vettel. He was in the car last year. Part of me feels he'd love a go in this car because it feels much better than what Aston Martin had on offer for him the last couple of years, unfortunately for Vettel. But there was some optimism at a potential Vettel-Alonso duo for at least the first weekend or so of the season before Stroll is ready to go again. And there was actually some talk that maybe they were in discussions there and Aston Martin might have reached out to Vettel, or at least Mike Crack hadn't ruled out that possibility. Turns out though, it's not going to happen unfortunately. They confirmed that they'll give Lance the chance to recover, and if he doesn't, then Felipe will drive the AMR 23 after impressing in testing over the last few days. That's of course Felipe Drugovich, reigning Formula 2 world champion and, well, current reserve driver and probably starting driver for a brief period of time for Aston Martin. And a great opportunity for Drugovich, given the strength that car very clearly has of what we saw this weekend. Red Bull might well be over the cliffs and far away. That is at least the perception of some teams. We'll have a look at the potential gaps in a second from Red Bull to the rest of the competition, at least at the start of the season, where they admittedly struggled last year, right? Their car was massively overweight at the start of last year. They had the reliability issues. Perez reckons they're going to start out this year much stronger than they started last year, and we know how that championship ended last year, right? Ferrari though, they're not giving up hope yet. Fred Vasseur says, look, we weren't really here to do lap times, we were here to evaluate setup, and okay, some of our long runs might have been a little bit poorer than other teams. Aston Martin's long runs, their race simulations, were quicker than Ferrari's, which is quite a big deal, as we'll see here in a second. But he reckons that okay, some of the setups are incorrect, and also with Mercedes, they were running a very high, like a massive rear wing on their car, last year's rear wing. They probably won't be using that next weekend in the actual race itself. That should give them some time to unlock, but they wanted to use basically the same rear wing the entire weekend so they could correlate the data as best as possible, which it seems they've managed to achieve. Hamilton gave some thoughts on this and says Mercedes are in a much better spot this year than they were in last year. He says everyone was devastated at the first test last year after the bouncing, and they're in a much better spot now. Okay, there's some things to work on. They're not where Red Bull are, they're not where maybe Ferrari are, they might not be where Aston Martin are, which is quite the statement to even think about making. And George Russell does confirm though, much more positive day 3, and we're going to be in better shape next week with more to come, he says. And even Toto Wolff mentioned the fact that they're not revealing their whole hand in testing, as no team does, and it does feel to me that even Red Bull, despite dominating testing, I think they've still got more in the tank. I would not be surprised at all if they've got much more Red Bull up their sleeve, and that's why Mercedes feel like, okay, they were 3 or so tenths behind Red Bull on track, but they feel like they're further behind than that in terms of pure lap time right now, but at least they have a platform that's going to be easier to work with and take steps forward compared to what Mercedes were dealing with the W13. So many pundits have given their thoughts on what the rankings are going to be for the season. Ted Kravitz gave his perspective, which is a little bit different to what Will Buxton says, and we'll compare the couple here. So the top 4 are pretty much undisputed in some order or another. Did want to mention lower down though, because McLaren at 10 is crazy to me, and I kind of hope this isn't the case, but still, this is quite the statement. I know a lot of people right now have McLaren based on testing. Things can be very different. Many positions can change here because this midfield is tight, there's no doubt in my opinion, but McLaren have struggled and had a lot of focus on them, and the car looked a bit of a handful really, and other teams have taken steps forward, I think, in Haas and Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri, maybe an Alpine as well, so it's tough for McLaren right now, and Will Buxton reckons they might even be the worst car as it stands. Probably not over the course of the season, but right now they might be one of the weakest cars on the entire grid. I think Ted Kravitz put them 8th maybe in his rankings. There is quite some optimism about Haas making some good progress. It's kind of unclear how Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri are lining up, and Alpine as well, kind of an enigma really of the test because they never really did that much. They've got upgrades to come apparently for even the first weekend next time out in Bahrain for the Grand Prix itself, but they didn't really do too many race runs, they didn't really push laps too hard, so we don't really really know how good that Alpine is, but it's the top 4 that are interesting, right? But Red Bull clearly number 1, as expected. Ferrari number 2. The gap there, though, is the important factor. And then Mercedes, I don't think are going to be as far behind as they were last year. Maybe they will be, but it's not exactly Mercedes like doing badly that's causing them to maybe be 4th right now. It's Aston Martin taking a massive step. Their car looks one of the most planted on the entire grid, and Ted Kravitz said on the notebook that if you took yesterday's runs in terms of race pace, you would have had, okay, Verstappen didn't do any laps yesterday on the final day of the test, but it would have been the result in Bahrain if the Grand Prix was to take place today. Verstappen P1, Perez P2, Alonso P3, based on long run time. In terms of consistency, in terms of tyre degradation, they blew Ferrari out the park, actually. And there was even some people saying that Aston Martin might even be better than Red Bull in certain aspects. That, I think, is taken it a step too far, and either this hype train is going to crash and burn, or it's actually going to come true. But they looked very strong so far this weekend, and look, it seems shocking. Like, I don't think Mercedes are going to end up being the 4th best team over the course of the year, but look, there's a chance. Last season they were struggling at the start of the year. They were getting out-qualified by Bottas in his Alfa Romeo, so there's a good chance that Aston Martin start the year very well. Whether they can continue that, I guess we'll see, but they've got a lot of money, they've got a lot of resources. They will, they said they want to be a top team within 3 years. They might be there now. So Mercedes and others have given their thoughts on this, right? Because of course, if Mercedes are going to be the 4th best team at the start of the season, sounds remarkable, but of course it depends what the gaps are at the end of the day, because they might be 4th best, but if the gaps are tiny, then it maybe doesn't really matter too much with upgrades to come. Mike Elliott also confirmed from Mercedes on Ted's development corner that they do have some ballast to play with, as in their car is marginally underweight, so they can strap some metal to parts of the car to make it heavier and improve the balance to some degree, which they're probably going to need because their balance wasn't great this past weekend. They also admitted, Mercedes, that the 3.5 tenths gap from Hamilton to Perez is a bit flattering, they feel. So they don't think they're that close to the front. They reckon it's more like 5-6 tenths, something like that. This time last year, they were 7-8 tenths off the pace. And in fairness, that was a W13 going up against a Red Bull that was 20 kg overweight, apparently. So this year, the Red Bull is significantly better than it was this time last year. So if Mercedes can be closer, they can be somewhat confident, and they can take some, well, I think this car will be easier to work with than last year's was in terms of making improvements quickly, but they're going to have to be competitive fast, especially if they lose points to a team like Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso. So Amos reckon here that Red Bull is the fastest by something like 0.3 of a second than Ferrari. And I would say the concerning thing here is that this was the case across both long runs and also in qualifying trim. And there is again kind of discussions here that in the long run, the Red Bull are going to be even better with the tyre degradation and other factors as well. But last year, at least Ferrari could get it on pole, right? Like last year, Ferrari were the fastest over 1 lap, but it was Red Bull fastest over the race for various reasons. But this year, it's looking in terms of 1 lap pace and in terms of long run pace that Red Bull have at least 2 to 4 tenths in the hand over Ferrari. Ferrari didn't really do any kind of quali sims at the end of the final day. They were on a bit of a different schedule, so we didn't really get to see how they matched up against Perez and Hamilton in similar conditions. But yeah, most believe that Red Bull are about 3 tenths down the road from Ferrari, and another 3 tenths back are Mercedes. So this number that Mercedes reckon as, okay, 3.5 tenths was flattering. Maybe we're talking 6 tenths back to Mercedes, which, okay, it's marginally better than last year, but it's not where they wanted to be. I'm sure if they turned up here to Bahrain with 3 tenths gap, they'd be very optimistic given how far they were behind in development. 6 tenths is a big deal, and they're going to have to turn that around quickly if they actually want to compete for the championship this year, especially if Aston Martin are throwing their hat in the ring as well. Toto Wolff mentioned, as interviewed in the same article, that by Mercedes calculations, Aston Martin could end up in 2nd place. Like, what a statement that is to make, given the fact that Toto Wolff is talking about what is effectively a customer team of his in Aston Martin. They pay for the Mercedes engines, and Mercedes are therefore meant to be the better team. Maybe not the case at the start of the year. Alonso and Drugovich both very convincing in the long runs. There was an argument that parts of the track are actually as good for the Aston Martins they are as the Red Bull, and obviously Alonso's driving at a high level as well. We saw his crazy consistency in the long run by the numbers yesterday, and well, obviously Mercedes believe Aston might even be 2nd best, and not even better than Mercedes, but better than Ferrari as well. Now that might well be based on those long run data and points, as we saw Fred Vasseur said, that doesn't tell the full picture of what Ferrari are going to be capable of here, but Aston Martin are going to surely be in the hunt at the very least, and there's been a lot of optimism, I know, from the Spanish F1 community as to what this means for Fernando Alonso. Like, could he challenge for the title? I know that's been thrown straight around. Which, look, I do think is probably at least one step too far, given what we currently know, and it's only testing at the end of the day. We're going to have to wait and see whether the hype train actually arrives as intended when we get into Bahrain quali in about a week or so's time. But yeah, Alonso's race simulation was very similar actually to Verstappen's pace at last year's Grand Prix, which is, you know, obviously the cars this year are going to be better, but still to be able to achieve that in testing, not even in practice or even in the race itself, is, you know, quite something to note. So yeah, we shall see, right? But Mercedes are certainly concerned about the threat from Aston Martin here, and the thing for Mercedes is they are bringing upgrades relatively shortly after the start of the season. They now reckon that it's going to be Baku, we'll see here in a second, where they're going to bring their big upgrade package that's going to make them a championship contender, they believe at the very least, and give them unlock the time they need to unlock with this evolution of their package. There isn't going to be a plan B that was discussed a few days ago at this point. But the problem is, right, if Mercedes end up like P7, P8 or something, because Aston Martin are right up there in the mix, then Mercedes like lose so many points to Red Bull to such an extent that they can't even challenge for the championship when they do have a race-winning car, if they do. So it's exciting to see Aston Martin right in the fight potentially, but it does mean that for the other top teams, if it is clearly Red Bull number one, and then it's a massive mix-up between Alonso and maybe Drakovic or maybe Stroll if he's back, and the Ferrari guys and the Mercedes guys, there's going to be some great battles, but Red Bull could run away with it even more than we're already expecting them to, if indeed this is the case. So it's going to be very interesting for second, third and fourth, but at the start of the season, I do believe that Red Bull are looking very scary indeed, and they might put some points on the board over the first couple of months that are just straight up unattainable for any other team to match on the grid over the course of the season. And also confirmation here that Mercedes are looking to bring their W14 upgrade package for Baku. We saw the other day that it was George Russell that said it was going to come in Imola, which is the 6th race of the season. Baku is only the 4th. It's after a month break really, because there's the whole of April is like nothing there because it's meant to be China. That's not happening anymore. So Baku is now the 4th race of the season after Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and Australia. So that's going to be a big one for updates, and Mercedes probably need that upgrade package as early as they possibly can to not fall too far behind Red Bull, Ferrari and possibly Aston Martin as well. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.